As many of you may know, April is Autism Awareness Month, and I've got a super great project that I learned a long time ago called the weighted blanket, and I've got a really fun new update for you today. It's going to be awesome. We're going to use the fantastic Michael Miller Fabrics. This is Sloth in Circumstance, and these sweet little sloths just couldn't be softer and more snuggly. The perfect project to add our poly pellets for and make this super heavy weighted blanket. This one's weighing up to almost 8 pounds, and I'm going to walk you all through the steps. That's right, I'm dying to get started. I'm Rob Appell from Michael Miller Fabrics, and this is Making It Fun. Today's project is going to be using 5.5-inch squares, but you could do this with just about anything. And before we even dive into the construction of the project, let's talk about a couple of the different things that make the strategies of working with the Minky fabric so much easier. And that is, one, we are going to always use a sharp blade, and I'm actually using my 60mm today. It's the larger wheel, so that when I do use this in different amounts of folds, I have a little bit deeper cut, and I actually don't have the problem with the hardware here hitting into the ruler. I'm also using a nice ruler that has really good, easy to read markings with the 1/2-inch markings included. I just found this ruler. It's a Creative Grids ruler. Not that that matters so much, but what does really matter is it's got the 5.5-inch mark throughout the lines, and I have found that I really like that. So now with cutting with my Minky, right now we are still looking at our fantastic sloth fabric. It is folded in half, as you can see here, and I've already been cutting my squares, those 5.5-inch squares. So what I want to try to do is not move it too many times, and I'm going to come down here and I'm going to find the 5.5-inch line running through the ruler, and that's why I like it, so I can see it over and over again. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure I've got what I need, and now with good pressure I'm going to cut all the way through. I'm going to move that up. So Minky, because of its wonderful softness, also has a tendency to move around a little bit, be a little more flexible, and so like I don't want to be scooting, I want to be moving things like my ruler. So I'm going to cut like that. Now here's the next trick I want to show you, but you might want to put your earmuffs on because I do have a little vacuum here nice and handy, and I'm going to turn it on. And if you're like me and you don't like the fiber all over your sewing room, I will do that after each cut or after every few series of cuts, just to keep the amount of fiber down in the air, right? So to make our squares, I've made 5.5-inch strips. Next thing I wanted to do, no matter how many stacks, although I will say I did no more than 3 strips, so 6 layers of the Minky, because the more layers, whenever you're quilting, you stack and try to cut. If things shift, you're going to be less accurate in your patchwork when you get over here to your power tool. So with this, I'm going to now go ahead and just take a moment, and I'm going to true off this selvage edge with my left hand. So I'm going to go really nice and slow and careful. There. Now I'm going to just go ahead and, with lifting up that ruler a little bit, here's that 5.5-inch mark. And then I just go ahead and start slicing down my squares. 5.5, 5.5, 5.5, and so on as I go. And then what I actually did, just to make my life super easy so I could just sit at the machine and enjoy the patchwork process, is I then went back in and I counted it out. So today's project has a layout of 9 by 12, and so as I go ahead, I'm going to build the rows that have the 9 pieces in them. So I'm going to use 5 of one fabric, 4 of another, and then alternate to get the checkerboard effect. So with that said, I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of my sloth fabric, 1, 2, 3, 4 of my Minky fabrics there. So in today's project, I actually used 1 yard of each of the fabrics for the quilt top, and then another 1.25 yards for the quilt back, because the whole project finishes at 45 by 60. There is no batting in this project. There is no binding the way we're going to finish it out, but we are going to come back and we're going to fill it with the plastic or the poly pellets for the extra weight that we're after, and then that can be also proportionate to what size of weighted blanket you're trying to make. So get your squares ready, get yourselves organized, and then we're going to bounce right on over to the sewing machine and just use a simple 1/4 inch seam allowance as I get ready to join my Minkies. Now, one of the next things I found out just in the quick process is Minky, of course, is going to have more flex in one direction than the other. So there's a couple of things I did when I was laying out my fun rows, is I also found which way the stretch went within my sloths. So I'm going to match those up. So this was the least amount of stretch in both of those directions. And I'm going to lay them right sides together, just like yay. And I'm going to come over to the sewing machine, and you could use cotton or polyester thread for today's project, because technically it is polyester based. I've got an edge guide with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but you could even take a deeper seam. And if you're new to sewing Minky, maybe you want to, because Minky, like I said, has a bad reputation for shifting around a bit. So look, I'm just going slow. I'm using my edge guide, and I'm using the fiber in the direction in which it's built so that things sew together nicely. Now I'm just going to continue on my repetition. So the ones that I have to double check really closely are the green ones, or the olive color. I should call it by its proper name, of course. So here I'm going to make sure that flex goes back in, so that basically those were the two least stretchy sides. Back to the machine I go. Then the next thing that we're going to want to do with, especially in this style blanket, remember it's a weighted blanket, and a lot of times the weighted blankets are the fantastic blanket for those of us, like myself, who get a little overwhelmed with too much sensory or too much stimulation. And so for me, I want my pattern pieces to all be facing the same direction. I want everything to look uniform. And so when I come in here to put my next little sloths, oh, that was the perfect pull too. I couldn't have done that any better. Now first I want to point out these little guys are the same, so I don't want them next to each other, and I certainly wouldn't want them rotated and doing different things like that. So now I'm going to find a different sloth. Perfect, we can get away with this guy right here, because it's a different sloth in the center square. I'm happy with that. They're in the appropriate direction. I can actually tell because I'm looking at the green ones. They are both hanging upside down, or what we consider upside down. I don't know, I'm not a sloth. Wait, maybe I am a sloth in hyperspace mode, right? So at any rate, here I'm gonna fold those back together, bring it back to the machine. So all I'm pointing out is please pay attention to the direction of the print. One, for your design layout for you and your audience, and two, so that you're making sure that your stretch of the fabrics are working with you throughout your beginning patchwork process. And then once you've built 9 squares into a row, you're going to build 12 of those rows, and you're going to go ahead and get them all dialed in and assembled. And I'm going to come back and show you once I have all of those rows going. Check out the design wall. You can see I've already got about a good half start on us. Look at this. They're just hanging out over here, and this has been super fun. And by the way, I do have to mention, I'm loving the new setup in here, because as I'm sewing and preparing for the videos, I'm literally just putting stuff as it goes. So I think it's working out pretty well, and I do appreciate you all being here today. I'll be right back. Once all of your squares have been assembled into their rows, again, we just have to simply start to put the rows back together. I got a little bit of a head start on you. I have 6 of them over on the wall, rows that is, with 9 each in there. And then I've got the other 6 here on the table, because I'm going to build this in 2 halves and then assemble it down the center seam just for the simplicity of bulk weight management. So as we're back here, I've already assembled these 2 pieces together, paying attention to my orientation of my super sweet little sloth there. Oh, I almost got those S's out properly. Now I'm looking at my checkerboard alignment. I'm making sure everyone's vertical. I'm gonna lay these bad boys right sides together. And now I'm not gonna worry too much about pinning because I'm gonna individually manage each union or each section where the seams come together from the earlier patchwork. So as I go over to my sewing machine now, I'm going to go ahead and kind of let the weight of this just kind of fall onto the table, partly because I'm standing while I'm sewing, so you could also put this on your lap. Now, the next thing I really want to do is I'm just going to marry up these seams, and I'm just going to choose that at every intersection, we're going to let the green push over, and that way, row by row by row, we're basically always matching up our checkerboards. And why we're doing that is seam management, bulk management, where we're working here. So I'm going to start with a nice back stitch, secure everything, and I'm only going to think about these seams that are at the first union of the 5.5 inch squares. And then as they come through, sometimes I have to get in here and lift a little bit with my presser foot just to keep things going nice and smoothly under the foot. Do not push and pull with your Minky. That causes distortion, but it also could cause you to break your needle. So now here I'm just going to go ahead and flop it the other direction so that the green is on top. Switching it up with my fingers there, the green is on the top. So yes, I'm just simply managing one set of squares at a time. And if you're at all like me, you found that not every seam matched up perfect at the bottom union there, and that's okay. That's the beautiful thing about working with Minky. Oh, and as I say that, I can see a seam's coming, so I can't bail out now. Let me show you what I'm talking about. There it is right there in the camera. So you can see that's not the perfect patchwork, but I'm just going to cheat a little bit into it. I'm going to let that push this way, let this push this way, and I'm just making sure that I capture the low end, the small end, because chances are I distorted that to begin with. That's how it ended up that way. So sew through all of your columns or all of your rows just like this until you have two halves, and then I'm going to show you how to put those two halves back together. I'll be right back with that. Oh, if I only didn't have to show you this, but it's always a good idea to come back and inspect your seams as you're working here before it gets too deep, because here was one of these spots where things just kind of came apart a little bit. Wasn't paying attention to my seam allowance, so I need to come back here. Oh, and I can see exactly why it happened. Things just shifted around. So in that case, I'm going to pull out a little bit more of the stitching so I can really make sure that I get that union. And then I'm just going to start back at the seam allowance to make sure I really catch it. That white fabric had just rolled underneath there. Right back on target, but it's much easier to do it now than it is to do it later, or especially once we start filling it with our poly pellets. If those are falling out all over the place, we'd be very disappointed once we have the backing already in place. So at any rate, check your seams as you're working. Make sure you don't have any curling corners that blow out and cause a little bit of an issue. As you're building up these sections, and we're going to get this whole top assembled and get the backing on here real quick. As you can see, I now have the two halves all put together, and the only thing I have to be aware of is just the orientation of those swaths again. And of course, I came off of the machine as I needed because I've been watching the whole thing develop as I've been working on it. So now I'm just going to take and lay right sides together. And if you're just joining us in the middle of the video, in the middle of this quilt, I am handling both sides. I'm doing a center seam right now of my big patchwork because I'm using the Minky fabric. We are making a weighted blanket, and this is already becoming a little heavy, and so this should have now the opportunity to allow both sides of the quilt to travel through at about the same pace. And so I'm going to manipulate my seam allowances. Now as I go to line up underneath the presser foot, I'm just going to take a few stitches in place, lock them in, and then I'm just going to worry about my hands down here. But I'm also keeping the weight of the project up here on the table. I really don't want it hanging too low. So now I can kind of come here, and I'm just going to kind of manage each section where the squares come together, just like we did before, each seam allowance, and maintaining my same dark green fabric coming over the top, just so it just goes nice and smooth. And the first one lined up, and we're just going to go right through until we're all done. And the nice thing about using our patchwork as our seam matches, every time we do that, then when I got to the very end, all the way across that 45 inches, I still have all of my fantastic patchwork matching up right there, just like that. Super, super easy. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we are not going to use any batting in this project. Eventually, we're going to get our poly pellets to fill through these channels here. So what I really want to do is I want to choose my backing fabric, and this should measure out 45 by 60. So I'm going to take my backing fabric, and of course I chose our sloths because they're the theme. So this piece here has already been pre-cut down and vacuumed to 45 by 60 like this. And so what I'm going to start to do is I'm going to start to manage these pieces right sides together. And then I'm going to go around and I'm going to pin or wonder clip the heck out of the edges so that nothing moves. This is the part where I want to be really, really stabilized. I'm eyeballing to make sure that I actually left enough of those selvages that I can actually leave that out there. And now what I really want to do is I want to come out here to these outside edges, right? The edges that don't have as much flex, that don't have as much stretch. And I want to sew on, and I'm going to sew on one side, then the other, then what I'm going to call the bottom completely, and we're going to go just around the top corners, because then we're going to drop the beans in through the top. So we're basically making more like a duvet than a quilt in the way that we're going to do the facing finish instead of a bound finish. And I'm going to use the stretch of the fabric in my advantage by sewing the firmest sides first to get everything secure. But I'm going to take a minute and make sure that everything is perfect on the table before I dive into the machine. As we come over here now to the machine, I'm leaving the weight of all of this on the table. I'm going to go ahead and have the Minky fabric down. Just a reminder, we are right sides together here, and I'm going to go ahead and make myself a considerable seam allowance there, like nice tie off, and then I'm just going to watch again. And what I'm really doing now is my best to not let any weight start stretching in the bottom layer of the Minky. Just take your time. And the cool thing about this project is, by the nature of the way it's built, it's okay if there's a little bit of extra material. As long as the edges are lined up, it should be no problem, because we're going to fill it. It's more three-dimensional. So yes, it did work very nice to sew down one side and then the opposite side by using the wonder clips or some pins or something to secure very nicely. Now, I was concerned down at the bottom, and I had some technical issues with my cameras and lights all at the same time. So I went ahead and got a little further along without all of you, mostly because I was a bit nervous about this process. But you can see now here that it actually worked fantastic. So what I did is I just took and I trimmed off that selvage that I had left. And then I used a wonder clip at each section here just to secure it nicely. And then I've just gone ahead and stitched across here. So 3 of the 4 sides are done. Now what we need to do is the exact same thing for the top. So we are leaving it open so we can turn this thing right sides out. I also left a bit of selvage, and you can see, I'm just going to take a moment while this is sitting here like this, and I'm just going to trim off. I know, I'm being terrible, but I'm actually using the selvage as my guide, because that is where I need that to come to, so that it's equally trimmed down. There we go. Now that that's been settled, I'm going to reach into the bottom corner, and I'm going to turn it, like I said, right sides out. And this is awesome. Super, super awesome. But I do now still need to set up, we're going to build columns and channels to drop those beans into individually as we start to weight up our weighted blanket. Careful, here it comes. So, oh, that looks beautiful on camera. I just love it. Now, one of the things I want to do as I'm throwing it about is I want to get it immediately flattened out on my work surface as much as possible. Another great time to check for any seams that may have gotten away. There's no better way to secure all of this, even with the walking foot, than to safety pin here, because we now need to go ahead and make these long sewing rows. We're only doing the rows right now. But I've gone ahead and dropped in some safety pins for basting all throughout. They're going through the top and the backing layer. Remember, there is no batting, one in every sloth print, so that way I have no slipping as I'm going. I'm also having the walking foot on the sewing machine so that the levels and the layers travel through nicely together. But the first thing I really need to do is I need to address the finishing of this upper edge. So I did trim off that excess selvage to the length that I needed it. And now what we want to do really is we want to come in here and prepare to do a top stitch or rolled under like yay. But what we also need to be aware of is I want to come back in here and drop the beans through these columns or these channels. So I want to leave about a 1-inch opening I can slide my funnel in each and every time. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take this each section at a time up here with the walking foot on. And I'm just going to start by rolling that first little edge underneath there. Just like yay. I'm going to get this set up while it's in my hand. I'm going to get right underneath my walking foot, right where I want it. Start to set those stitches, kind of hang on to back stitch. Now I'm going to stitch a little bit, lock it in. The needle's going to come up. Then I'm going to jump over about 1 inch or so. And I'm going to go ahead and make a few more stitches. And I'm going to go ahead and stitch across, setting up my next section here. Bringing the weight of the blanket to me here, the weight of my weighted blanket. Just don't get carried away and forget to leave your opening. So I'm going to lock it down. I'm going to go here. Might as well just turn my needle down off. So I'm going back to a needle up mode. Now I can make a couple more stitches here, hold it in place, go on through. All right, may not be perfect, but I've got the top stitching set all the way across the top. Now I can go ahead and start preparing to do my runs, and I'm going to start in the middle of the project. So I want to start down here at the bottom middle, and I've got the walking foot on the machine, and I'm going to go ahead and just come all the way down, stitch in the ditch style. So this is where the weight and the bulk can get us. So walking foot if you can, lots of pins. We want all of our beads to be uniformly distributed throughout the blanket. That's what kind of helps the weight stay nice. And again, constantly just adjusting the weight, just allowing the machine to do the hard work for us. Just watching my foot go down that channel. Now, the good quilter in all of us, or the traditionalist that has ever worked on this kind of stitch in the ditch, is generally going to want to go up one direction and down the other. And you may do that if you want. Remember, we've left those seams open at the top. But I'm really happy to report that because of the walking foot and because I did so much pin basting, I can tell that right as I got where I needed to, I had no shifting, no problems. And so I'm going to continue sewing this side out of the machine right now as I'm working, just to kind of help keep the bulk and everything traveling. I may rotate the other side around, mostly based on spatial management and efficiency, not due to shifting today. Do it as you choose. I'm not here to try to correct you from doing good habits. Now, in some of my patchwork, you'll see me go all in one direction, but I'll explain that later when we get to one of those in another video. So at any rate, I'm going to finish up all of this channel stitching. Okay, back from the sewing machine with that walking foot on. I did all those long channels. Now it is time to go ahead and add in our poly pellets. Whoops, let me show you what they look like. This is a bag here of the poly pellets, and the poly pellet bag itself, this is a 2-pound bag, and I went through earlier and I found out that about 1/3 of a cup is about 1.5 ounces, 2 ounces, around there for doing the math. And remember, at this point, you want to weigh your blanket first. Figure out how much weight you have, and then you want to build in the additional weight with your poly pellets. As a reminder, you're going to do no more than 10% the body weight of the individual that's going to enjoy the blanket. And let's take it to the extreme spectrum. Maybe, you know, somebody that's a larger adult, pushing 200 pounds. So that would be a 20-pound blanket maximum, but you might be wiser to look at making 2 10-pound blankets that you could layer, just because of the management at the machine, the management on your table, the space, because as we start to add these beans in, there's going to be a lot more weight and drag, especially as the weight of the project comes up and over the table. So now what I'm going to do is, remember, we left those little slots, and I want to be systematic about it. So I'm going to start in my first long row, and I did leave my safety pins in because I'm still going to go back in and stitch across after I fill in each column. So we're going to do each column through. I don't think the safety pins are going to be in the way. I'm going to use a nice level 1/3 cup per column. And I'm just going to go to the first one. Then I'm going to bounce over here to my second one. So I'm going to probably use about 2.5 bags of these poly pellets. So I'm going to add about 5 good pounds of weight to this blanket here. Okay, now as I'm filling this last channel, so again, 9 channels to fill, 1/3 of a cup each for me. Now what I want to do, let's move this out of the way. Let's get this back out of the way so we don't have any problems. Now, grabbing this very securely and safely by the top, I'm going to sit here and shake this like this. Hopefully you can even hear it maybe in the microphones, but I'm trying to get all of the weight of those filler beans all the way down at the bottom. Go ahead and take a couple more safety pins and run them across that top channel to go ahead and make sure that the beans stay down nice and low. I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to do it kind of manually on this first run and see what happens. Now I'm going to run my fingers in front of the stitching to make sure I just don't have any of those pellets right in front of my needle. And I did leave the safety pins from earlier to, again, help try to keep all the weight and everything shifting. Or from shifting, I should say. Sorry, now I'm focused on my stitching. And as you get towards the end, because things have been moving around, don't forget, come up here and give a little extra gravity, little shake. Keep those down at the bottom. Just pushed into a bean, broke the needle. Great place to stop. I'll be back to show you how to finish out that top. So I might have left off, or I might have edited it out, at a broken needle, and I'm going to tell you I have been through an entire package of needles at this point, and I should have told you I was using the size 90-14 just for a little extra thickness. Jeans denim is a great choice, and now I'm at the very top seam, and a lot of it was just because I didn't take the time to really anchor my beans down below my stitching line, and everything's full, the thing's getting really, really heavy, so I just wanted to bring you back because I'm going to finish this last seam right now. And so I've just been also learned that a lot of what helped was keeping the weight up on the table, up in front of the machine, and just kind of keeping this as a roll. And as I come in here now, I'm going to go ahead and, because I have so many folded edges, I want to be extra cautious not to catch any of the pellets in there. And this needle's already bent, so we'll see how we get. All I have to do is go 9 squares, 45 inches, and I am holding my breath. Now this is the advantage of all that pre-top stitching we did, because I'm just now really sealing those little 1-inch seams that I had left open. Oh, as I say that, I'm pouring beads on the ground. Oh, you can hear how beat up that needle is, but we have made it, folks. That is right, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, there it is, thud. Our weighted blanket is finished completely, and it is fantastic. Of course, I've got a few threads to go back in and clip out, and I might have, I'm not sure if I'll edit it out or not, but I might have left off with a broken needle scenario. And I'm going to point out, in this entire project, I went through a package. That's right, I broke 6 needles, because I had a fresh one in the machine when I started. You should be using a size 90-14. I prefer the jeans denim style, and I basically just wasn't taking the time to put enough pins in to keep the beans or the pellets down below the stitch line. And so as I was pushing a little fast, the needles will not go through these poly pellets. So be careful. Of course, I had my safety glasses on as always, and I survived. And now I've got this fantastic weighted blanket for a friend or even myself, because as I mentioned earlier, I do struggle a bit with feeling overwhelmed and over anxious often. And I like something that just offers a bit of compression. For me, I found it's my wetsuit. So not only do I get the benefit of the ocean, but I get the benefit of being in the squeeze of my physical wetsuit. But I have really noticed a difference, and I've met so many people out there that just love the weighted blankets and have made many for their friends. So I just want to say thanks for all of you who use your sewing skills to help others, and I will do the same and come up with also other fantastic projects right here. Oh, I am tongue-tied. It's been a long day of sewing, but that's what happens when I've been making it fun.